Today our panorama is from the Arctic island of Senja. I will walk you through the process of merging 5 images using Camera Raw and Photoshop with an emphasis on colour correction and lens flare. It's a sunset backlit scene. It has extreme exposure variation and some colour flare. We will take the 5 images together and pop them into Camera Raw. When they open in Camera Raw, as usual, they form a film strip. We select all and we merge to Panorama. Once this process is done, and it takes a little longer than usual, 5 images stitched is a little bit of time in Photoshop. The first thing we're going to do is check our boundary warp. Now, as previously mentioned in other programs, I often take boundary warp to 100%. I can see here in this particular pano that I don't want to do that. I'm leaving pano warp and spherical as it is. So after saving the image, we open it in Photoshop. First thing we want to do is straighten the image. Sometimes we can't do this. Today we can. The horizon is nearly right, it just tilts down towards the right. So using the ruler tool, we can actually straighten that. Next thing we want to do is use some of our sliders to best effect, taking the shadows up and the highlights and whites down. Don't forget to pop the vibrance and then watch your color temperature. Need to bring that up a little bit, and our tint down towards the green. Once we've got it just right, we can adjust some of the other things like exposure and contrast. As always, while I'm in Camera Raw, I want to do a gradient. Now in this particular panorama, we're going to do a few gradients. The sky is quite complicated because of the variance in light and shadow, and so 2 from the bottom, which are toned down, and at least 3 from the top. Now we go into saturation. We want to warm the image even further, and at this stage it doesn't matter if we slightly overdo it, because we can adjust it once we take it into Photoshop properly. So bump up the oranges, yellows and a little bit of the reds, and then change the hue to the desired effect. Once we're happy with that, we can then go back to the basics and just check. For instance, texture, we might need that. Indeed we do. It's a snow-covered beach and there's lots of light and shadow across the snow, so we want to pull out the texture there. Warm it a little bit more perhaps, then we can open the image. Looking at the image, the first thing we want to do is get rid of all the spots, marks and little aberrations that appear in this photograph. So there's a few things across the sky, and as mentioned before, there's quite a lot of lens flare in this particular photograph because we are shooting backlight. We're shooting right into that beautiful sunset, and we've got some colour correction to do as well in this process. Working along the sky, we can see that there's quite a few spots there that need to be taken out. It's good to remember to look all over your panorama, moving it back and forth, just to check that there are no more spots. Now looking through the water, we can see there's a few highlights we don't want there, and using the spot healing brush tool, we can get rid of all of those. Next thing we want to do is tap the clone tool, reduce the opacity a little bit, and let's see if we can start by removing some of that pink and reddish tone from the water. This is quite a skilled process. We need to carefully clone out certain areas And then we need to tone down the clone tool a little bit more and brush it out so that it looks quite natural. By changing the opacity, you're able to do that quite successfully until it looks just right. The colour aberrations in the snow are going to be a little bit tricky. And once we've finished cleaning up a few of the areas, this is what we're going to tackle. So taking the lasso tool, we are going to do the one further on the right here first. And this is quite tricky, but it can be done. Using hue saturation, we look at the colours and we realise that it's going to be the red tones and also the magentas. So by desaturating these one at a time and then bringing the lightness up, we're able to eradicate most of it. By lassoing the certain area, we're able to do that without changing any other part of the panorama. It takes a little time, and it also takes a little bit of skill to learn this, to recognise the colours that need to be eradicated. So working it slowly, we get some good results. Now looking across the image, we can see that they were the only two places that are of any concern. So after flattening that image, we can now concentrate on maybe doing some more brush work. But first, let's have a look at these power lines. Absolutely awful, and they're catching the glow of the sunset. I don't want them in my photo. So by using the brush tool, the healing brush tool, I can get rid of all of these. And this is not a big process, few strokes, and most of them will be gone. And of course, this corner of the image looks so much cleaner when we've eradicated all that mess there that appeared because those power lines were catching the light. Quite happy with that. We're now going to just touch up a few more areas and have a look now at how we can clone out some of the bright spots in the snow. Again, reduce the opacity, and then looking at the sunlight, we can see that we need to move some of the colour that's flared out from the sun, and by doing the clone tool and at a greatly reduced opacity, we can very, very easily eradicate most of this. We're not looking for perfection. We're rather looking to just tidy up and clean up. A photo like this is quite difficult to shoot anyway, and by eradicating most of the stuff as we use the clone and spot healing tools, we can eradicate it quite nicely and improve the image out of sight. It's a slow process, and one that you can spend quite a bit of time on. If that's important to you, it doesn't matter if you do it over and over again. Just do it little by little, keeping the opacity right down. That's looking better with each stroke. Okay, now we're going to take the clone tool again. We're going to take the opacity right up, and we're going to try and get some of the orange out of the snow. Make sure that your brush tool is to the right size, even when you're cloning, so that when you do clone, you're only doing it little by little, small pieces, and you don't overdo any one section. Again, this is quite skillful, but it's quite an art, and it's something you can learn. Already this complicated area where it had a lot of sun flare has been improved. Okay, now we're going to look at our hue and saturation, and we want to warm up the colours, but we want to change the hue. So by decreasing the saturation and changing the hue, notice that we have a mask ready and we've filled that with black, and as we brush over that area, not the sun, just what the sun is lighting up, we can change the way it looks, make it more natural looking. Let's enlarge the picture now and let's have a look at what else we can do. All right, the sun's going to need a little bit of work on it. So select a nice bright yellow, change the opacity to a very low, under 10% in vivid light, and then just gently brush around the sun 2 or 3 times, and maybe even along the whole scene at the top. And by the way, the cabin's looking dark, so using my curve brush, or curve tool rather, I'm just going to pull some more light. And I only noticed that actually while I was working on the sun. But you can see how the sun's lighting it up, and we want that cabin to stand out a little bit more. So again, we brush across the horizon, those lovely mountains catching that last bit of light. We can also do the actual beams of the sunlight. Using the same colour or family of colour, we can just brush them in gently so that they shine a little bit brighter, and it's a focal point, it's the hero of our shot. And now with the brush, bring the opacity up a little bit, we can then work the snow. As you can see, there's light and shadow right across that snow because it's late in the day, it's casting shadows, and we can just bring out the highlights a little more to just pop that contrast to make that image sting a little better. Now that does look really nice. Doesn't take much, but every little bit helps. Finally, while I'm thinking about my light and shadow, I love to use the magic wand tool and adjust my curves. In previous Panorama tutorials, I've mentioned how important it is to use the magic wand tool and your curves to just bring out dark pieces. Because sometimes a dark spot in the image will be as bad as a very bright spot. We call them eye magnets, and we just want to tone those down a little bit. Okay, so now we can do some more brush work, and we're using a very light colour here, but it's almost a pure white because the snow across the fjord there is very, very bright, and the camera hasn't picked it all up. We're just making it look a little better. Making a copy now, I'm going into my Nik collection and I'm going to Color Effects Pro. I might have mentioned this once before in one of my tutorials. I absolutely love Color Effects Pro, but you need to use it with some discretion. And it's the Glamour Glow that I'm after. Now each time we do an image with Glamour Glow, we set the sliders very, very carefully, and each image will be treated differently. This one doesn't need too much saturation, but a little bit more glow, and of course a little bit more warmth. Once that image is processed out of the Nik software, you'll see that pop beautifully. And then from there we can just touch it a little further to make it look a little better. Now I did make a copy for insurance, don't need it. It's fine as it is. I'm going to make a copy now. No, I'm not. I'm going to flatten it. I've thought of something else. I'm going to do a little bit of hue and saturation in the yellows. I'm going to change the hue, and I'm looking at the sun. I want that sun to glow even more, and I want to match the hue on the opposite side of the panorama a little more. So by now going into the normal mode and right up to 100%, I have filled the mask with black, and I just want to bring that sunlight out. And you can see clearly that it matches more to the tone on the other side of the pano. Okay, flatten that. And looking at it, we can see there's a couple of issues. Here's one up in that corner. I've noticed that's a little bit too dark. What can we do? Well, back to our clone tool and lower the opacity quite drastically, right down by 2/3. Take a spot and then just, too strong even. Let's take it down even more. Here we go. We can just lighten it up in that corner. And when we look at it overall now, it's a lot better. And there's one more little spot up here that we maybe can just brush up as well while we're going. There, the sky, although it's dark and we've put a gradient on it, it looks very nice now. And that little touch up that we did then has just made that much difference. Now I'm enlarging it. The actual size of the pano wasn't big enough. I like to work around 40 inches at least to finish my image, 40 to maybe even 42 images, and then I increase the height just that little bit. Zoom out a little bit and have a look at that. Beautiful. Just a stroke. Finish that 2 pixels on the inside. Let's click through. And I've just noticed one more thing. Into my color picker, I want the reflections in the water to stand out a bit. We all make mistakes. You can see there that I used the wrong one. I want to go into vivid light. I want to tone it right down. Here we go. Look at that. Just a few little marks which just heighten the beautiful reflection of the mountains in the fjord. And I'm looking at a very light creamy colour now to just lighten the actual fjord itself. It's got that beautiful sunlight across it, and we just want to peak that a little bit more. That's made such a difference, and it's only a few extra brush strokes. So we save it now in our folder with the selected images that we had, and we have a look at it on its own, full screen. It's pretty wow. Actually, it's beautiful, isn't it? Arctic Norway. Arctic Norway is a sublime area of natural beauty. You can join us in the coming years on a photo tour with myself, Ewen and Shellie, Froidevaux. And in doing so, we will take you to marvellous locations just like this one. These are fully catered experiences with private transport and the best possible guidance at every step. We run the best photo tours in the world, and now you can see why. Have a wonderful day.